My name is David, and this story is about how sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones who can cause us the greatest disappointments. Maybe you've experienced something similar. You dedicated a huge part of your life to someone with all your love and trust, and saw that effort rejected when you needed support the most. If you haven't experienced this, I sincerely hope you never do. I'll tell you how. Over the years, I ended up learning this lesson in a way I never thought I would need to learn. My brother, Samuel, and I grew up in a humble neighborhood in Los Angeles. Our family didn't have many resources, but our mother was a hard-working woman, and our life had a touch of hope, a shine that she insisted on keeping alive. But when Samuel was only 14 years old and I was 19, our mother passed away suddenly. Our father had left us years earlier, and so, the responsibility for everything fell on my shoulders. I started taking care of Samuel as if he were my own son. He was a confused teenager, tempted by a world that sometimes offered dangerous paths, but I was always there to guide him. Even with the weight of being responsible for him, I kept in mind the certainty that everything I did was worthwhile. The first few years were full of challenges, and to handle everything, I took on extra jobs, worked at night, and did my best to keep our home. It wasn't easy balancing work with the demands of being a father to a teenager who, deep down, was still a child. There were days when I hardly slept, spending the early hours reviewing his schoolwork or helping him study for an important test. Our father had left us years earlier, and so, the responsibility for everything fell on my shoulders. I started taking care of Samuel as if he were my own son. He was a confused teenager, tempted by a world that sometimes offered dangerous paths, but I was always there to guide him. Even with the weight of being responsible for him, I kept in mind the certainty that everything I did was worthwhile. The first few years were full of challenges, and to handle everything, I took on extra jobs, worked at night, and did my best to keep our home. It wasn't easy balancing work with the demands of being a father to a teenager who, deep down, was still a child. There were days when I hardly slept, spending the early hours reviewing his schoolwork or helping him study for an important test. My friends and even some family members advised me to think a little more about myself, to give less to Samuel, but I could never listen to that advice. To me, he was my responsibility, my duty, and I would do anything to see him grow well and with the support I never had. Samuel was a bright boy, with a sharp intelligence and a generous heart. When he started doing well in school, every one of his achievements became a source of pride for me. If he got a good grade, it was as if I had been approved along with him. If he won a scholarship, it was as if we were both being rewarded for our efforts. Looking at Samuel gave me the strength to keep going. I felt good about being responsible for the success he was achieving, and I believed that this experience would unite us forever. It was years of sacrifice, and every decision I made was aimed at ensuring a better future for Samuel. I saw in him an incredible potential, something that perhaps he didn't even see at the time, but that I knew could be achieved with the right support. It was a kind of investment, but not financial. It was an emotional investment, a commitment that I had taken on as a life mission. I wanted him to have what I didn't, the opportunities, the support, a safety net. That was everything to me. To make this happen, I had to give up a lot. Still young, it was natural that I also had my own dreams, but I learned to put them aside. I turned down some promotions that would have required travel or long hours away from home, because I knew that my time was what Samuel needed most. I remember one time when I was called to work in another city with a higher salary. It was a golden opportunity for someone my age. My friends and colleagues didn't understand why I would reject that, and maybe even I, at some point, doubted my choice. However, every time I thought about Samuel, I was reassured. I knew he needed stability. If I left his side, he could get lost, and I couldn't bear the idea that everything I had done until then would be in vain. I went back to work and followed my routine, prioritizing what was important for both of us. I worked during the day in an office, and at night I did extra jobs to make sure Samuel had what he needed. Those years of effort were tiring. I remember spending early mornings revising his resume for his first internship and helping him practice for interviews. He had talent, but often lacked confidence, and I was always there to encourage him. If he doubted himself, I was there to assure him that he could go far. Every piece of advice I gave him was with the great hope that he would achieve more than I could even imagine. Besides moral support, there was also the financial side. Many times, I had to cut our tight budget to make sure he had appropriate clothes for interviews or to buy the books he needed for college. Once, I took some of my savings to pay for an extra course he wanted to take, a course that would help open doors for him. I remember his smile when he got his first scholarship because of it, and the hug he gave me. At that moment, everything seemed to make sense. It was as if all the sacrifices were justified. It wasn't just about helping Samuel get an education. It was about offering him a life of possibilities. I knew that without the support I gave him, he might not be able to overcome the obstacles that would appear. Looking back, it's clear that there was a part of me that hoped, one day, to receive the same affection and dedication in return. But at that moment, all I wanted was to see him grow and achieve a future that was never an option for me. Samuel seemed like a different person, full of confidence, and with that gleam in his eyes that I always knew was there, but that rarely appeared so clearly. During dinner, he thanked me, saying he wouldn't have gotten to where he was without my help. "David, you're the reason for all of this. If it weren't for you, I would never have made it," he said, with a sincerity that moved me deeply. Every word of his that night was like a relief, as if the weight of years of effort and renunciation was finally being rewarded. He promised me he would always be by my side, that everything I had done for him would never be forgotten. And I believed it. Why wouldn't I believe it? He was my brother, and we were united by a bond that seemed unbreakable. At that moment, it was as if I was seeing the Samuel that I had always dreamed he would become: confident, accomplished, with a bright future ahead. I was proud, and more than that, I felt a genuine hope in our future together. After that internship, Samuel got a few more good opportunities, each better than the last. In a few months, he went from an uncertain recent graduate to a professional with a promising path. He was hired by an important company and, at a fast pace, began to gain respect in the market. With each achievement, he made sure to call me, share the news, and reaffirm his gratitude. He told me he would never forget the years when I had given up so much for him. I remember when he got his first big bonus. Samuel was ecstatic, and to celebrate he insisted on taking me to a restaurant far beyond what I was used to. I sat there, in that sophisticated environment, and was thrilled to see my brother grow. It was confirmation that he was now truly on a new level. He toasted, saying that this is just the beginning of everything we're going to build together. For me, every word of his reaffirmed our connection, and I sincerely believed that no matter what happened, Samuel would be by my side, just as I had been by his side. I even started to dream about some possibilities. Maybe one day he could help me open a small business, or that I could finally take a step back, knowing that my brother was stable and could support me too. It was a happy and hopeful period. I imagined that our relationship was an exchange, a partnership that only strengthened with time. Looking back now, I realize how things can change suddenly, how life is capable of surprising us in the most unexpected ways. However, at that time, I still believed that nothing could separate us, that the bonds we built were stronger than any adversity. As the months went by, things started to change, although subtly at first. Samuel was always busier, and the messages, which used to arrive daily, started to space out. When I called, sometimes he took a while to answer or said he would call back later, but he ended up forgetting. I convinced myself that it was just a phase, that he was adapting to his new job, to the pressure of an important position. But I felt a strange distance. Once, we met for dinner, and I soon realized that he was restless, answering with a hurried yes or no and always checking his phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he sighed and said the work was harder than he imagined. I wanted to offer advice, help him find a balance, but he seemed oblivious, uninterested in the conversation. There was a coldness there, a hurry to finish dinner that I hadn't noticed before. After that, I started noticing more signs. He started to cancel plans at the last minute, always with the excuse of work or some unavoidable commitment. Once, I learned from a mutual friend that he had gone on a weekend trip with new colleagues from the company. I thought about calling, but, to be honest, I was unsure, as if something told me it wasn't the time, that maybe he didn't want to include me. When he finally called to tell me about the trip, he spoke as if he had forgotten I existed, as if he didn't even realize that it had taken me by surprise. He described his colleagues as amazing people, who had so much to teach, and then I understood Samuel was slipping into a new world, and I was starting to become a piece of the past. I tried not to take it personally. He's growing up, it's natural that he seeks out new friends, new references, I thought. We don't create bonds expecting them to be stuck in time, right? But deep down, I already felt that he was on a one-way street, that the Samuel I had helped graduate and find his place in the world was no longer the same. It was like watching a rope stretch little by little, about to break, but without being able to do anything to prevent it. It was during this period that my life took a turn that I could never have foreseen. A health problem started to affect me slowly, and when I was diagnosed, it was more serious than I imagined. A condition that would require expensive and rigorous treatment. At first, I tried to keep up appearances, convincing myself that I could handle it alone. But as the days went by and the cost of treatment increased, I realized that I wouldn't be able to face it without help. Gradually, the illness undermined my energy and, with it, my ability to work full-time. My bills piled up, and my financial life began to crumble. The situation became so critical that I had to sell my car and get rid of some of the savings I had kept for emergencies. Even so, what I could get wasn't enough. There were days when I wondered how I would survive the following month. It was then that I thought of Samuel. After all, he was in a comfortable position, thanks to years of support that I gave him. That was the moment when I really needed help, and in my heart, I felt that I could count on him, just as he had always counted on me. It wasn't just a financial matter, it was about having someone by my side at this difficult time. I missed the strength he used to bring to my life, the presence he promised he would never stop offering. When I called him, I chose my words carefully. I didn't want to scare him or make it seem like I was pressuring him. I told him about the situation directly, but without exaggerating. I just asked him to come visit me, to take some time to talk, so I could explain everything calmly. On the other side of the line, he paused and told me he would come by as soon as possible. That week dragged on, and every day without news from him made me feel a greater emptiness. Until, finally, Samuel responded. The message was short and cold. It said he was very busy with work, that his schedule was packed, but that he would try to find time when he could. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was vulnerable, begging for support, and he didn't seem the least bit interested. Days later, I tried again. I called, texted, but the answers were always evasive. He dodged, suggesting that I look for alternatives for my problems. He even mentioned that maybe I should reconsider some expenses, as if I was living a life of luxury and hadn't sold practically everything to pay for my treatment. With each answer, I felt the ground open up a little more, questioning how someone so close could be so distant, so oblivious to my suffering. When reality finally set in, the pain was deeper than I expected. It was as if every refusal, every flimsy excuse, was there to remind me that Samuel, to whom I had given everything, no longer existed. I still tried to find a last resort, holding on to what was left of our connection. I decided to go to him. Maybe in person he would understand me. Maybe he wouldn't be able to look me in the eyes and just abandon me. With great effort, I went to the office where he worked. It was a huge place, modern, almost futuristic. As I waited, watching that world he now inhabited, a fear grew in me. I already felt like an outsider there, a piece out of place. When he appeared in the lobby, his expression disarmed me. Samuel looked at me as if I was a nuisance, an obstacle in his routine. "David, what are you doing here?" I said I was busy, he said, and the tone was direct, impersonal. I felt diminished, but still tried to explain myself, to talk about my situation, about what I was going through. He listened in silence, but there was no sign of empathy. When I finished, he sighed and, almost in a rehearsed way, started to give me justifications. He said the job demanded of him, that it was a delicate time in his career, that he couldn't take on unnecessary commitments. Unnecessary, I repeated, incredulous. In that instant, I realized that he saw my struggle as a burden he didn't want to carry. He suggested that I seek help from other sources, that I look for funding, a practical solution. It was as if I was talking to a stranger, someone who treated me with the coldness of an obligation. I wanted to yell, throw in his face everything I did for him. All the extra hours of work, the sleepless nights, the opportunities I left behind for him. But I realized it wouldn't help. He was there, so close, but unreachable, as if any memory of what we were no longer existed. Before leaving, I looked at him one last time and asked, in a tone that mixed anger and despair, "Samuel, don't you feel anything?" "Nothing for what we did, what we lived together." He looked away, shrugged and replied, "David, you chose that path. I followed mine. We have to learn to fend for ourselves, don't we?" With that answer, I realized there was nothing more to say. I left there, carrying a disappointment that seemed to weigh a ton, knowing that moment had sealed what was left of our relationship. That encounter with Samuel was the final blow. For days, I was trying to understand where I had gone wrong, at what point our story had fallen apart. I couldn't accept the idea that he, my brother, my friend, someone who meant so much to me, had simply discarded me. The pain wasn't just for the abandonment, but for the way he treated me, as if our whole history together was just an unimportant detail. I spent hours reliving moments of the past, the promises, the memories of when I carried our home alone, believing that this would unite us forever. I remembered the times he promised to repay me, the conversations where he spoke proudly of our bond, the gratitude he said he felt. Now, all of that seemed like an illusion, and I needed to face that reality. But at the same time, that deep disappointment was what pushed me to a necessary choice. I realized that continuing in that agony, waiting for a change of attitude, would only destroy me further. It was like being in front of a broken mirror and insisting on finding a whole reflection. As painful as it was, I needed to accept that he wasn't there for me, and that he never would be again. That bond that I idealized, that I valued so much, didn't have the same importance to him. I began to distance myself, emotionally and mentally, from Samuel. I abandoned any attempt at reconciliation or to make him see my pain. Deep down, I realized that he had made his choice, and that the bond that was a source of strength for me was just a step from which he distanced himself without looking back. It was like mourning, and in that process, the anger turned into resignation. I accepted that I was alone to face that battle, and that the support I so desperately hoped for would never come. Even knowing it wouldn't be easy, I started to fight with what I had. That was my way of starting over, facing my situation and dealing with the loss of that relationship, which was, for me, like losing a part of who I was. Gradually, I began to understand that I was in a process of grieving. Not just for the brother I felt I had lost, but also for the image I had of our relationship. It was painful to accept that while I saw our bond as unbreakable, he saw it as something circumstantial, something that could be left behind. During that time, everything seemed to remind me of him. I tried to move on with my life, focus on treatment and the work that remained, but I felt a huge emptiness. It was hard not to compare the support I gave him with the complete absence he returned to me. I was consumed by a sadness that mingled with a suffocating regret, as if I had wasted years of my life investing in an illusion. But over time, that sadness began to transform. I began to realize that while Samuel chose his path, I also needed to choose mine, a path that didn't involve him. Remembering my own efforts, I realized that my dedication was never motivated by a guarantee of return. Yes, I hoped he would be by my side, but deep down, everything I did for him was out of love, for the pride I felt for him, and that, regardless of what he did afterwards, was a part of me that I needed to value. That's when I started focusing on myself. I went after support groups, made new friends, people who, despite having no blood ties to me, showed more compassion and empathy than he ever had. In small gestures, I found the support I was looking for, not in big promises, but in simple words of encouragement, a look of understanding, someone to listen to my rants. Each of these people who came into my life without asking for anything in return showed me that the family we choose can be as powerful as the one we were born into. And by strengthening those new bonds, I began to realize that it was possible to move on. The wound was still there, but it hurt less and less each time. The mourning turned into acceptance. I was, finally, starting to leave Samuel in the past and build a new life, where the value of support and friendship was recognized and shared, without empty expectations, but with true reciprocity. Over time and the distance I created, I began to reflect on the true meaning of all that. I thought about what it really means to help someone, especially someone we love. When I chose to support Samuel, I did so believing that he would carry with him a lasting gratitude, that our relationship would be an exchange of support forever. But I realized that, unintentionally, I was expecting something from him that, for him, might never have been a promise. My expectation was that the family bond would automatically generate reciprocity, but, reviewing our stories, I saw that this was an idea I cultivated alone. While I saw every effort as a construction of something solid between us, Samuel saw only occasional help, a stepping stone to his own success. He didn't see me as a pillar. He saw me as a step that he didn't hesitate to leave behind when he no longer needed it. These reflections led me to question the value of sacrifice. I wondered if it wouldn't have been better to focus more on myself, to have sought my own growth instead of dedicating myself so intensely to the future of another person. But in the end, I realized that everything I did was by choice, not by obligation. I chose to help because I believed it was the right thing to do, because it was what my heart told me to do. I understood, then, that the problem wasn't the help I gave, but the expectation I created of return. I expected from him the same level of commitment and sacrifice that I was willing to give, and when that didn't happen, frustration overwhelmed me. When I realized this, I began to make peace with the situation. I decided that, from then on, I would do things for others without expecting anything in return. I realized that true acts of kindness come without a promise of reciprocity. This shift in perspective didn't erase the resentment I felt, but it helped me see the situation more lightly. I learned to appreciate altruistic actions simply because they are a choice, my choice, and not a debt of those who receive them. After all, the decision to move on became my strength. By facing my life in a new way, I saw that I didn't need to depend on Samuel or anyone else to find meaning in what I do. I discovered that my story didn't need to be tied to a return from someone. It could be full just from the satisfaction of having done what I believed was right. I started investing in myself. I went back to school, albeit modestly, but with a hunger for knowledge that I hadn't felt for a long time. And in the middle of that path, I also found people who valued my effort and who were willing to walk by my side, not because I expected something from them, but because respect and support arose naturally. I relearned how to build bonds, but this time without the pressure of depending on them for my happiness. I realized that as long as I'm good with myself, I'll be better prepared to face the disappointments, which will surely come, without letting them define me. Samuel remained as a reminder, an episode of the past that taught me a lesson. I didn't wish him ill, nor did I try to resume any contact. I went on with my life, and in doing so, the anger and resentment dissolved. I understood that our story, however painful, didn't need to be a prison. It was a lesson. One of those tough ones that life imposes, but that makes us grow. Today, I can say that I finally feel at peace. I learned that true strength comes from who we are on the inside, and that the only person I can really expect something from is myself. Now, I keep walking with my head held high, aware that the best way to live is to surround myself with those who truly want to be around.
Hi, you are on the Moving Narratives channel. Subscribe and follow our stories.